Erebus is likely the single most loved character in the history of Warhammer, and no, I don't mean that as a joke in the slightest.
Hip hip! Boo! Hip hip! Boo! Hip hip!
Boo! You stink!
But now hear me out. Genuinely, hear me out. When people say F Erebus and that sort of thing, to me, it always did seem as a kind of affection for this character, in a way, if that makes sense. Like, I've never once seen anyone have that kind of hatred for Erebus that I have for John Grammaticus, my mortal enemy, where it's, oh, he just destroys the story, he ruins everything just by being in it, God, I hate it when he shows up. No, he absolutely is the quintessential man you love to hate. Like, if ever a time came where they said, oh, we've retconned Erebus, or we just killed him off for whatever reason, don't worry, y'all hate him so much, so now he's gone, hooray, there would be such groans and eye-rolling. People would miss him the second he was gone. The same way you would hopefully miss me if I was gone. That's why you should subscribe to the channel. But in all seriousness, this video seeks to really pick Erebus's brain, really delve into his history and explain why he is the way he is, as well as everything he's done, and just get into the general trivia around this character so as to explain why I and so many others love him so much. And to start off with, that name of his, Erebus. It is supposed to be pronounced Erebus in the canon, but a lot of people do pronounce it Erebus, and I honestly do switch back and forth. The reason it's okay to switch back and forth is because both pronunciations are technically wrong. In reality, it's actually pronounced Erebus in the original Greek, and yes, it is a Greek name. Specifically, Erebus is the Greek deity personifying darkness. He's actually one of the children of chaos, the primordial state that existed before creation. Hence why it's so fitting that his background story written by Chris Wraith is called Erebus, Child of Chaos. A side note there, Warhammer actually does this now and again, where it will take some mythological figure or deity and name an evil character after them. Ahriman, for example, is actually a figure from Zoroastrianism that is essentially analogous to Satan or the devil. When we first meet Erebus in the Horus Heresy, I think it's really telling that his opening action is to effectively start destroying everything. In the opening volley of meeting this guy, he becomes immediately responsible for killing God knows how many millions or even billions of people, and I think there's just something beautiful about that. For those who don't know, what he did was, when Horus and his expedition fleet met up with a human offshoot called the Interrex, who were highly advanced with a developed culture, a working knowledge of chaos, and their own very strong military structure, as well as a more progressive way of thinking regarding Xenos, Erebus sabotaged their negotiations by stealing from them and burning a building. Yeah, that's our introduction to this character, and believe me, it only gets better. Because what he stole from the Interrex was the Anathame Blade, a type of sword imbued with power by the Kinnebrek, a Xeno race subjugated by the Interrex and carried as sort of junior partners in their empire, that has sorcery to it, wherein if you speak a name to it, it has a nemesis. He would later give it to a former friend of Horus named Eugen Temba, a now corrupted by Nurgle planetary governor on Davin. This wounding of Horus by Eugen Temba with the Anathame, something Temba was only able to do because it was the Anathame that possessed the name of Horus, caused Horus to go into essentially a catatonic state where Erebus could go into his dreams and start influencing him towards chaos. Now, we've all come to accept that, hey, Erebus is responsible for bringing Horus to the side of chaos, the heresy is his fault, yada yada yada, but let's take a moment to stop and appreciate the sheer god-tier planning going into that. He had to make sure he, A, was with the Lunar Wolves, B, that the Lunar Wolves would, by chance, because it was mostly by chance, come into contact with the Interrex, C, be able to get this heavily guarded artifact and cause enough chaos to spark war between the advanced Interrex civilization and the Imperium of Man. How much planning went into this? When did the planning start? How much of this was luck, and how much of this was his pure genius, and how much of this was the gods of the warp? Alfarius could never. Holy shit. Erebus's preferred nickname for himself is, quote, the Hand of Destiny. Now, people actually make fun of him for that in canon, but by God, does he deserve it. He has absolutely earned such an audacious name. Hand of Destiny indeed. There is actually a name for this specific trope that Erebus embodies. It is a character archetype called the Magnificent Bastard. And it's because it gets you to stop and say, "You magnificent bastard." They are awful and repugnant, but so charming and intelligent. And when you see a character like this have their plans come to fruition so perfectly, it is so rewarding, and you can't help but root for them in a way. Nobody, and I mean nobody, ever says, "Oh, Erebus is lame, I just don't like him, he's a lame story element, he's not a good character." Okay, now that I said it, some people might try and say it in the comments, but be realistic. You cannot hate a character this smooth. What's always made me gravitate to characters who are so unrepentantly and simply evil in this way is because a lot of the really cool things a character does can get bogged down with a clunky backstory that makes you think, yeah, what happened to you is bad, but it doesn't really justify any of this. It all feels disproportional. It all feels out of really character. But when someone is so perfectly evil like this, it all just fits so well. Even at his lowest points, he still manages to win. That's what stops Erebus from being something like a quote-unquote Mary Sue. We see him struggle, we see him panic, we see him fail and get thrown out, but he keeps coming back. He keeps getting back up, and he never loses that insufferable, smug attitude. The big examples of Erebus failing are the fact that he A, got beaten down by Karn to a pulp, B, got thrown out by Lorgar, and C, got nearly killed by Horus himself, and then effectively had to go it alone for the rest of the Siege of Terra. You know, he actually says as much himself that that's impressive. Specifically, he is known for having killed Argel Tal, the leader of the Gal Vorbak, and someone Karn the Betrayer was very, very close to. Karn, when he finds out about this, beats Erebus so badly in such an intimidating way. And when I say intimidating, I mean completely calm. He just beats Erebus to the ground, looks at him and says, "Get up." Beats him down again. Says, "Get up." Beats him down again, "Get up." This is the first time we see Erebus well and truly lose his cool. He thinks to himself, "No, I can't die like this can't be it. Out of the thousands of possibilities I've foreseen, this was never it. I'm the Hand of Destiny, I can't die like this." And he actually does an emergency teleport off of the Conqueror flagship. And actually circling back, that's one thing people hate him for, is having killed Argel Tal, who was such a great character. But even his killing of Argel Tal says so much. His controlling of events, his smug superiority as he directs everything from the shadows, because he had foreseen that Argel Tal's friendship with Karn would draw Karn away from chaos, and you can't have that. Even when killing his brother Argel, he's so smug about it that I just cannot hate him for it. It's not that annoying anime girl foo kind of smug that you see weird people on Twitter do. It's such an unmitigated sense of cruel superiority as he mocks Argel Tal in his dying moments. And for a lesser character, he would just get away with this, but it really comes back to bite him in the ass, and that's what I love. That's not even the worst of his humiliations, because after the failed battle at Cygnus Prime, an ill-fated attempt to try and turn Sanguinius and the Blood Angels over to the worship of Khorne, which almost did work but ultimately was a complete failure, Erebus blamed Horus to his face with an Athame dagger he got from Erebus himself. All because Erebus is so arrogant he couldn't control his mouth for 5 minutes. It's one of those rare moments we see Erebus panic, and even then he actually does take it like a champ, effectively waving his warriors away, knowing that what's about to happen is gonna happen no matter what. And even after this, he still turns up later in the heresy in the book Vulcan Lives, wherein he kills some fellow word-bearers who were still loyal to him because Erebus, and gives the Fulgurite, that's a different can of worms, to John Grammaticus. I would say that's probably the worst thing about Erebus. He had the opportunity to kill John Grammaticus and didn't take it. It's this consistent ability to stay in the fight despite acknowledging his own ass-kickings that makes him so compelling. He recounts his own failures and then acknowledges the fact that a lesser man would have just quit, would have just slunk into the shadows happy to be alive and licked his wounds, but not him. That's not how he plays. And we get some really amazing insight into his life before the Marines, as to why he is the way he is. This comes from the aforementioned short story, Child of Chaos. Part of what makes this story so interesting is the format of it, because it's Erebus recounting his life story to an invisible narrator and acting as though there is someone in the room with him, almost as if he's talking to a remembrancer. It's here we finally find out why he is the way he is and what happened to make him into the man he is. That being literally nothing. For all intents and purposes, his family life was normal. He was just an average Colchizian child with little to do, little to gain, and who would have been completely unremarkable if it not for one thing in particular. Erebus has a raging case of antisocial personality disorder. In the more common parlance, he's a sociopath. As a child, what he would do to deal with his boredom was sit in the shade of his house and find scorpions in the sand. He would then proceed to dismember them with his fingers for fun, seeing how much of them he could pull off before they died. And he would get stung. He recounts a specific instance where he was stung so badly, he spent weeks in bed, racked with sweats and fevers and chills, and it really seemed like he would die. He barely pulled through. And then immediately after, he was back in the shade of his house playing quote-unquote the scorpion game. Cruelty towards animals, a disregard for one's own safety, and repeated risk-taking behavior are some of the clear indicators, especially in young people, for antisocial personality disorder. And it only gets worse as he increases his penchant for manipulativeness and a desire to hurt other people. This is the crux of the man we know as Erebus, and I use that term very specifically because Erebus is not Erebus. We don't actually know his true name, because his mother once said to him, "Why can't you be more like that other kid in the village, the one who writes in henna words from the holy texts on his face? Everybody loves him. Why can't you be more like Erebus?" So he takes that to heart and garrots Erebus to death. And this isn't just some random act of violence, there's a method to this madness. And that's another thing for people with antisocial personality disorder. Oftentimes, things have a design behind them. It's not wanton. The reason for this is because Erebus himself states, in any other situation, he would have just been stuck working some kind of trade for the rest of his life, being a carpenter or what have you, or a potter. But he didn't want that. He wanted, ever since he was little, to be rich. He wanted to be powerful. He wanted to be bathed in luxurious robes and have a palace with a fountain and lots of, quote, pretty young things lounging around. The way to do this would be getting in with the priesthood that existed on Colchis before Lorgar's rise to power. He recognized them as extremely corrupt, and his first thought was, man, I want to be corrupt too, that looks awesome. So he killed the Erebus who was famous, took his reputation and his name, and used that to get in with the clergy at a young age, becoming a quote-unquote prodigy child who everybody loved. But despite all that garb, it was all a facade. Those tattoos he had on his face, none of it really ever meant anything to him to start with. But eventually it did start to really hit home with him. These words of chaos he didn't know what they were, but that is what they were, began to really resonate with him on the inside, and eventually he began to believe it himself. He wasn't just citing scripture to get people to like him, he was doing it out of a bit of a genuine sense of earnest, but he still never lost that incredibly selfish, manipulative edge. And one day, he looked at his face in the mirror and saw 4 aspects of himself staring back at him. That's when he began to worship chaos. That's when he understood chaos and became the Erebus we know today. He looked in the mirror and realized chaos had been directing him ever since the beginning. That is so cool to me. Now, obviously nothing good lasts forever, and eventually Lorgar would begin his conquest of the planet, spreading his more monotheistic faith, predicting the Emperor and Magnus's arrival on Colchis. So Lorgar and his fellows who understood the true nature of what they were worshipping went underground, doing their best to keep the real faith alive as Lorgar spread. But they would eventually jump ship and join Lorgar's side, because that's part of the thing with Erebus. He has no problem switching sides and being with whoever will support him if he gets to operate how he sees fit from the shadows and secretly direct events. He does eventually, through a lot of machinating, get in close with Lorgar, And that's not just for the reasons of Chaos, because apparently Chaos had sort of had its eye on Lorgar from the beginning and Erebus knew that. It's actually for Erebus's own enjoyment more than anything, because Erebus explains, like the sociopath he is, he views people a lot like the scorpions he used to play with as a kid. He likes to get close to the biggest, most powerful ones and see how long it takes him to get stung, because risk-taking behavior is a big part of antisocial personality disorder. That's why things like getting beaten by Karn or flayed alive by Horus don't faze him all that much or take him out of the fight, because it's all part of the game to him. Similarly, when he first lays eyes on the Emperor, he sees the biggest scorpion he's ever seen, and the only thought in his mind, while the whole planet is on its knees in rapture on Colchis, is exhilaration at the sight of the man that he will bring low. He knew this from the first moment he laid eyes on the Emperor. And he did. The entire galaxy was brought to its knees and has been burning for 10,000 years, all because of the little boy sitting in the shadow of his house playing the Scorpion game. Jesus Christ. And what's more, he acknowledges how much people hate him. He knows how many people despise him and how they want answers, they want some closure about him, and he does not care. He literally laughs, saying, "You're probably gonna want some closure. You'll want some defining moment in my life you can point to and that can be regretted over. But the fact is, there isn't one. I've always been this way." Even characters like the Joker have some sort of quote-unquote message to them, where they're like, oh, it's all society, it's this, oh, one bad day, or something like that. Not Erebus. He is pure evil, distilled to its best essence, and I love it. It even gets better from here because he spends a bunch of time hunting down Olanius Persson and his group, and eventually kills Erda, the mother of the Primarchs. Sure, he summons 4 greater demons to do it, but he does kill her, a supremely powerful entity and character everybody hated. I've actually seen people joke that having Erebus kill Erda was supposed to make her seem sympathetic or make us like her by having her killed off by the quote-unquote biggest villain in 40K, but it just made everybody cheer Erebus on. People literally cite that as one of his redeeming qualities. Even when he realizes that Erda played him in death by delaying him, he still doesn't flinch. He just realizes that and says, I guess there's surprises in for me yet. Onward and upward, I suppose. Then crushes one of her belongings under his heel and walks off through a rift. So impertinent, so slick, he does not slip. That was back in the book Warhawk, and now we're closing in on the End in the Death Volume 2. We haven't really heard much of him since then, but I do believe in the final book, he will have a role to play. One thing we do need to keep in mind though is, we know what happens to Erebus after the heresy, so don't expect him to die in the last book, because he is known to be one of the main members of the ruling Dark Council on the Wordbearer's demon world in the Eye of Terror, Sikaris. With Lorgar sequestered away in meditation for the last 10,000 years, it's fallen to him and Corferon to quote-unquote rule the Wordbearers, but in reality they just squabble against each other for power and influence. Something he actually enjoys doing because he finds Corferon to be unthreatening and effectively a jester of the Legion. As I have previously stated, the Wordbearers, ever since the opening of the Great Rift, have been making a lot of moves in terms of spreading the Dark Faith, in engaging what is known as a war of faith against the Imperium to topple the Imperial cult. So there is a good chance we could see him return to the setting, especially since Corferon recently has returned, at least in a small capacity. Now, when he does return, it's unsure what exactly he'll do or how much of a role he'll play, but one thing can be for certain, he's gonna be doing what he's always been doing, working in the backline and pulling strings in that puppet mastery way that made us love him so much and hate him just as much. Erebus himself actually comments on this, saying people hate him because he's a quote-unquote traitor, but despite the fact that he is the architect of the greatest betrayal in galactic history, he claims that to be a complete misnomer, stating, "I am no traitor, I was always in league with Chaos. I am what I have always been," and he explains why that's how the Chaos Gods have come to value him so much, because in their ever-shifting games and machinations, he provides the one thing nobody else really could: stability and consistency, because Erebus is Erebus, and he was Erebus before he even was Erebus, and he always will be. I, for one, really want him back, because lately, in Warhammer, things have been very brute force, if you know what I mean. A lot of really big actions, people slamming into each other, Arcs of Omen there, Tyranids there, the Lion's back, Gilliman's fighting off the demons and getting Terra under control. I think it's been missing this level of subtlety and scheming that punctuated a lot of the earlier stages of the heresy and is something I always really loved. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think Erebus will bring a lot to the setting if he returns, or would he just be a relic of a bygone age, clinging to relevance despite the fact that his star has fallen? Do you guys like Erebus at all, or do you just think he's a shit character? And despising the guy does actually kind of mean you like him, because that means he did his job effectively. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on the character in the comments below, and until then, I will see you in the next video.